What happens when death claims everyone you love, yet somehow spares you? When your body clings to life, even as your soul begs to follow your family into darkness? For Nathan Caldwell, surviving the massacre at Serpent Creek Crossing wasn't mercy. It was the beginning of a torment worse than death itself. Abandoned in a wilderness of enemies, his blood seeping into unforgiving earth, Nathan prepared to take his final breath. But fate had other plans. This is the story of a man forced to live when he yearned to die, a healer who defied her tribes, traditions, and the extraordinary journey that would bind their destinies together across a divide deeper than hatred and wider than war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the wagon train as it made its slow progress across the rolling plains. June 1873 had brought drought to the territory, turning streams to dust and grass to brittle straw. Nathan Caldwell squinted against the glare, his hat brim offering little protection as he walked alongside the lead wagon. At 32, he'd seen enough of the world to know when trouble was brewing, and every instinct told him they shouldn't be here. "We should have waited for the cavalry escort, James," Nathan said, pitching his voice low enough that only the wagon master could hear. "These are Comanche hunting grounds." James Tucker, a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Cavalry's 3 weeks late, Nate. Folks got children to feed, land claims to settle. Can't keep everybody waiting at Fort Richardson forever." "Could have at least waited until we had more men," Nathan persisted, glancing back at the meager train. Of 5 wagons, 15 souls all told, 4 families and himself, the lone unmarried man hired on as scout and hunter. Too few to mount an effective defense if it came to that. "You're seeing ghosts, Caldwell," Tucker said, though his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. "Comanche hit 2 settlements north of here last month. Army's been hunting them ever since. They're miles away by now." Nathan wasn't convinced. The land felt too quiet, the usual chorus of birds conspicuously absent. He'd spent enough time in these territories to recognize the silence that fell when predators were near. "Papa, can I ride up front with you?" The request came from Tucker's daughter, Emma, her freckled face appearing at the wagon's canvas opening. At 16, she possessed the kind of spirited determination that reminded Nathan painfully of his own sister, lost to cholera years ago. "Not now, Em," Tucker replied, his gruff tone softening slightly. "Stay inside with your mother." Emma's gaze shifted to Nathan, a flash of something that might have been admiration in her blue eyes. "Mr. Caldwell could teach me more about tracking. I've been practicing those signs you showed me." Despite his unease, Nathan found himself smiling. "Another time, Miss Emma. Your father's right. Best stay in the wagon today." A pout quickly replaced by resignation. "You all feel it too, don't you? The trouble coming." Tucker's shoulders stiffened. Emma Jane Tucker, inside, now. The girl disappeared back into the wagon's depths, but her words lingered in the hot, still air. Children often sensed what adults tried to ignore. They reached Serpent Creek just past midday, though creek was a generous description for the shallow ribbon of murky water that wound through the dusty landscape. The banks were steep, forcing the wagons to cross at a natural ford where centuries of buffalo and later cattle had created a gradual slope. Nathan rode ahead on his dun gelding, testing the crossing. The water barely reached his horse's fetlocks, a blessing and a curse, easy to cross, but evidence of the drought's severity. He was halfway across when he saw them, fresh tracks in the muddy bank on the far side. Unshod ponies, at least a dozen, no more than a few hours old. His heart sank. They weren't alone. Nathan spurred his horse back to the waiting wagons, where Tucker had already called a halt for watering. "Comanche sign on the other side," he reported without preamble. "Fresh. They know we're here." Tucker cursed under his breath, then squared his shoulders. How many? Can't say for certain. Enough that we should turn back. Now! The wagon master's jaw tightened. To where, Caldwell? Fort's 3 days behind us. Next settlement's 2 days ahead. We're exposed either. Way! Nathan knew Tucker was right, but that didn't ease the dread settling in his gut. Then we circle the wagons here. Use the creek bank as a natural barrier. Post double watches tonight. Tucker nodded, then raised his voice to address the other men who had gathered, sensing the tension. Change of plans, folks. We're making camp here for the night. Protests rose immediately. Samuel Wright, a farmer from Tennessee traveling with his wife and 3 young sons, stepped forward. We've got hours of daylight left, Tucker. My boys are restless enough without stopping early. It's not open for debate, Tucker replied, his tone brooking no argument. Caldwell's found Indian sign. We're circling up. The next hour was a flurry of activity as the wagons were arranged in a tight circle, the teams unhitched and secured within the makeshift corral. Nathan helped the men dig shallow rifle pits at strategic points around the perimeter, while the women prepared a cold supper, no cooking fires allowed that might announce their presence more clearly than necessary. As dusk approached, Nathan found himself sharing a watch position with Robert Miller, a quiet shopkeeper from Missouri who had sold everything to start fresh in the West. Miller's hands trembled slightly as he checked and rechecked his rifle. First time facing Indians? Nathan asked quietly. Miller nodded, his throat working as he swallowed. Read about them, of course. Seen pictures in Harper's Weekly. Never thought I'd... My wife wanted California. Prettier country, she said. I chose Texas for the cheaper land. The regret in the man's voice was palpable. Nathan offered what little reassurance he could. Keep your head down, do exactly as Tucker or I say, and with luck you'll have plenty of time to second-guess yourself. In the years to come, a wan smile was his only response. Night descended with agonizing slowness, the heat of the day giving way to a slight chill that did nothing to ease the tension gripping the camp. Children were hushed, conversations held in whispers, every eye straining to penetrate the darkness beyond their circle of wagons. Nathan moved between the watch positions, checking on the men, offering quiet words of encouragement. He found Tucker, sitting with his back against a wagon wheel, rifle across his knees, staring into the blackness. You should rest, Nathan told him. I'll wake you if there's trouble. Tucker shook his head. Couldn't sleep if I tried. Been leading trains west for 15 years. Lost men to rivers, disease, even a tornado once. Never lost a whole train. He looked up, his weathered face grim in the starlight. Don't intend to start now. Nathan nodded, understanding. Every man had his pride, his sense of duty. Tucker's was bound up in delivering these families safely to their destinations. Emma said something today, Tucker continued, his voice so low Nathan had to strain to hear it. Said she dreamed of wolves last night. Not the four-legged kind, the kind that walk like men. He gave a humorless chuckle. Girl's got her mother's gift. Sees things before they happen sometimes. Before Nathan could respond, a sound came from the darkness, a single mournful howl that was no wolf, but a perfect imitation made by human throat. It was answered by another, then another, a haunting chorus that seemed to surround the camp completely. War cry, Nathan whispered, reaching for his rifle. They're coming. Tucker was on his feet in an instant, bellowing orders. Positions! Everyone to positions! Women and children to the center wagons! The camp erupted into controlled chaos as men scrambled to their assigned spots. Women gathered crying children, and weapons were distributed with desperate haste. Nathan sprinted to the eastern perimeter, the most vulnerable point in their defense. He had just reached his position when the first riders appeared, ghostly shapes emerging from the darkness like specters conjured from nightmare. The attack came with the speed and ferocity of a flash flood. Warriors on painted ponies burst from multiple directions, circling the wagon train. whooping and firing arrows in high, arcing trajectories that sent them plunging down into the defenders' midst. "Hold fire!" Nathan shouted, knowing that in the darkness every shot had to count. "Wait until they're closer." The Comanche made 3 circling passes, testing the defenses, loosing arrows that thudded into wagon canvas or buried themselves in the dirt. Then, as if responding to some unseen signal, they charged directly at the wagons. "Fire!" Tucker's command cut through the din. Rifles cracked in ragged unison. 2 warriors tumbled from their mounts. The rest kept coming. Nathan fired, reloaded, fired again. Beside him, Miller gave a strangled cry as an arrow found his shoulder, but the shopkeeper kept his position grimly, working his rifle despite the shaft protruding from his flesh. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed the defenders might repel the first assault. The warriors pulled back, regrouping just beyond effective rifle range. Then came the fire arrows. The first wagon erupted in flames so suddenly that Nathan could only watch in horror as the dry canvas became an inferno. Screams rose from within. The Wright family, he realized with sickening clarity. Samuel Wright abandoned his position, running toward the burning wagon that held his wife and children, only to be cut down by a warrior who had breached the perimeter. After that, everything dissolved into chaos. The defensive line collapsed as men tried desperately to save their families rather than hold their positions. Nathan fought his way toward the center wagons, where he'd last seen Tucker's wife and daughter. He found Emma crouched beneath a wagon, her mother's body sprawled beside her, an arrow through her throat. The girl's eyes were wide with shock, her hands pressed against her mouth to hold back screams that might draw attention. Nathan pulled her from her hiding place. "Stay with me," he ordered. "Do exactly as I say." Together they made their way through the carnage, dodging arrows and warriors who had dismounted to finish the slaughter with knives and war clubs. Nathan spotted Tucker fighting desperately against 3 warriors, his face a mask of blood and rage. "Papa!" Emma cried, lunging forward. Nathan caught her around the waist, dragging her back as a lance pierced Tucker's chest, the wagon master, dropping to his knees, then pitching forward into the dust. "He's gone," Nathan said harshly, pulling Emma toward the creek bank. "Nothing you can do for him now." Their only hope was to reach the horses corralled within the circle, to mount and flee into the darkness, while the warriors were occupied with the camp. But as they rounded a burning wagon, they found their path blocked by a tall warrior, his face painted for war, a bloody scalping knife in his hand. Nathan pushed Emma behind him, raising his rifle only to find it empty. In one smooth motion, he reversed his grip, using the weapon as a club. The warrior dodged the desperate swing, countering with a thrust of his knife that Nathan barely avoided. "Run!" he shouted to Emma. "Get to the horses!" The girl hesitated, then bolted as Nathan engaged the warrior again. This time, the knife found its mark, slicing across Nathan's ribs in a line of liquid fire. He staggered back, gasping at the pain, but managed to land a solid blow with his rifle butt that sent the warrior reeling. Nathan turned to follow Emma, only to see her frozen in place, staring in horror at 3 mounted warriors who had cut off her escape. One of them raised a bow, drawing the string to his ear. "No!" Nathan lunged forward, knowing he was too late, too far. The arrow took Emma high in the chest. She crumpled like a marionette with cut strings, her body small and broken in the dirt. Something snapped inside Nathan then, a tether to reason or self-preservation, severed by the sight of the girl's death. With an inarticulate roar, he charged the mounted warriors, heedless of the odds, wanting only to reach them, to hurt them, as he had been hurt. He never made it. A searing pain erupted in his back as an arrow found him, driving the breath from his lungs. His legs gave way beneath him, and he fell, face first into the trampled earth. The world narrowed to the sound of his own labored breathing, the taste of blood and dirt in his mouth. Around him the massacre continued, but it seemed distant now, happening to someone else. Nathan didn't feel the second arrow that struck him, nor the third. He was already floating somewhere above his body, watching with detached curiosity as warriors moved through the camp, finishing the wounded, taking what they wanted from the wagons before setting them all ablaze. His last coherent thought before darkness claimed him was simple regret, not that he was dying, but that he had failed in his duty to protect these people who had trusted him with their lives. Then there was nothing but the void, welcoming him into its merciful embrace. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Morning came to Serpent Creek with the indifference of nature to human suffering. The sun rose over a scene of desolation. Charred wagon frames, scattered belongings, and the unmistakable stillness of death. Buzzards already circled overhead, patient scavengers drawn by the promise of flesh. Among them moved a solitary figure, small against the vastness of the plains. Morning Star stepped carefully between the bodies, her dark eyes taking in the carnage without visible emotion. At 26 winters, she had seen death before. It was the constant companion of her people in these troubled times. But the scale of this destruction gave her pause. She had not been with the war party that attacked the wagon train. As the tribe's apprentice healer, her place was at the camp tending to children, the elderly, and the wounded who returned from such raids. But something had drawn her here at dawn, a restlessness in her spirit that her mentor, Old Crow Woman, would have called a visitation from the spirit world. Morning Star knelt beside the body of a young girl, noting the single arrow that had taken her life. Clean death, at least. Swift. She murmured a brief prayer to the Great Spirit, not for the white child, whose spirit was already on its journey to whatever afterlife her people believed in, but for herself, for the burden of witnessing. She moved methodically through the camp, her trained healer's eye cataloguing the manner of each death, the positions of the bodies telling the story of the massacre's final moments. The white men had fought hard, but they had been outnumbered and outmatched by warriors born to battle. A sound stopped her, so faint she might have imagined it, a whisper of breath where there should be none. Morning Star froze, her senses straining. There it was again, barely perceptible, the shallow intake of air from a living throat. She followed the sound to a body sprawled face down at the edge of the creek bank, half hidden by tall grass. A white man, his back pierced by 3 arrows, his clothes darkened with blood, both dried and fresh. By all rights, he should be dead. Yet as Morning Star knelt beside him, she could see the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest, feel the faint warmth that still emanated from his skin. Life clung to him with stubborn tenacity, refusing to surrender to wounds that would have killed most men instantly. She turned him gently, revealing a face streaked with dirt and blood. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30. Winters, with features that might have been handsome before pain etched itself into them. His skin was deeply tanned, marking him as someone who lived outdoors rather than in the white settlements. A scout, perhaps, or a guide. Morning Star's first instinct was to leave him. He would die soon enough without her intervention, and if any of her tribe's warriors returned to count coup or collect scalps, finding her helping a white man would mean severe punishment, possibly even banishment. But the healer in her rebelled at the thought. Old Crow Woman had taught her that the gift of healing came with responsibility, to ease suffering wherever it was found, regardless of whether the wounded wore war paint or carried crosses. The body is just a vessel, the old woman had said. The spirit within recognizes no boundaries of skin or tongue. To turn away from pain is to turn away from the great spirit who created us all. With a swift glance around to ensure she was still. Alone, Morning Star began her assessment. The arrows had to come out, but removing them without proper tools and medicines would likely kill him if blood loss didn't do it first. She needed to bring him to her healing lodge where she could treat him properly. But how? Her horse was tethered half a mile away, and she couldn't carry a full-grown man that distance. A solution presented itself in the form of a travois, a simple drag sled used by her people to transport goods, the wounded, or the dead. Several of the wagon train's horses had been killed in the attack, but at least 2 were missing, likely having broken free during the chaos. However, the harnesses remained, and pieces of the wagons could be repurposed. Working quickly, Morningstar constructed a crude travois from broken wagon shafts and canvas. It was poorly balanced and wouldn't last long, but it only needed to reach her horse. The real challenge was moving the wounded man onto it without driving the arrows deeper or causing additional bleeding. She positioned the travois as close as possible, then, with a silent prayer to the spirits for strength, carefully rolled him onto the canvas. The motion elicited a groan from the unconscious man, the first sound she'd heard him make. Blood seeped from around the arrow shafts, fresh and bright against the dried brown stains. Morningstar quickly packed the wounds with herbs from her medicine pouch, yarrow to slow bleeding, crushed willow bark for pain and fever, binding them in place with strips torn from her own deerskin skirt. Then began the slow, arduous process of dragging the travois across the uneven ground toward where she'd left her horse. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying as morning gave way to midday. Sweat dampened Morningstar's buckskin dress, and her muscles protested the unfamiliar strain. Several times she had to stop and check that her patient still breathed, his life force seemingly sustained by nothing more than sheer stubbornness. When she finally reached her pinto mare, Morningstar was exhausted. The horse nickered nervously at the smell of blood, requiring soothing words and gentle hands before it would allow the travois to be attached. Once secured, the going became easier, though Morningstar led the horse at a careful walk to avoid jostling her fragile cargo. Her destination wasn't the main Comanche camp. Taking the white man there would be a death sentence for them both. Instead, she headed toward her private healing lodge, situated in a small hidden valley several miles from the tribal encampment. Old Crow Woman had established the place years ago as a retreat for difficult healings that required isolation, either due to contagion or spiritual need. When the old healer had passed to the spirit world the previous winter, the lodge had become Morningstar's inheritance and sanctuary. Few in the tribe knew of its exact location, and those who did respected the taboo against approaching a healer's sacred space uninvited. It was the only place she could hope to treat the white man without discovery. The journey took hours, the sun completing most of its arc across the sky before the small valley came into view. Nestled between 2 rocky ridges and shielded by a grove of cottonwood trees, the valley offered both concealment and access to a year-round spring, essential for the healing work Morningstar pursued. The lodge itself was modest but sturdy, its frame of bent willow saplings covered with buffalo hides that had been carefully scraped, tanned, and sewn together. Unlike the temporary tipis the tribe used when moving between seasonal hunting grounds, this structure was semi-permanent, with a stone-lined fire pit at its center and a smoke hole that could be adjusted to control ventilation. Morningstar tethered her horse in the shade of the cottonwoods, then set about the delicate task of transferring her patient from the travois to the lodge. Despite her care, the movement caused one of the arrows to shift, sending a fresh wave of blood down the man's back. Inside the lodge, she laid him on a bed of soft furs, positioning him on his side to avoid pressure on the arrows. Now came the most dangerous part of the healing, removing the shafts without causing fatal damage. Morningstar lit a small fire in the pit, placing her bone knives and iron awl in the flames to purify them. While the tools heated, she prepared her medicines, blackroot to fight infection, crushed echinacea to strengthen the body's natural defenses, powdered oak bark to seal wounds, and a special mixture of herbs whose composition Old Crow Woman had guarded jealously, sharing it only with Morning Star in her final days. When everything was ready, Morning Star knelt beside her patient and began the painstaking work of removing the first arrow. It had entered just below his right shoulder blade, missing his lung by the width of a finger. The iron arrowhead was lodged against bone, requiring careful manipulation to free it without leaving fragments behind. Working with methodical precision, Morning Star cut around the shaft, widening the wound enough to grasp the arrowhead with her smallest bone pincers. The white man stirred, a low moan escaping his lips as pain penetrated even his unconscious state. "Be still," she murmured in her own language, knowing he couldn't understand, but hoping the calm tone would reach him nonetheless. The path to healing begins with greater pain. This is the way of all medicine. The first arrow came free with a sickening sound of flesh releasing metal. Morning Star immediately packed the wound with her herbal mixture, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed to a manageable seep. Then she moved to the second arrow. This one was more problematic. It had entered at an angle, the shaft breaking off near the skin, leaving the arrowhead buried deep in the muscle of his lower back. Morning Star had to make a larger incision, following the path of the broken shaft with her fingers until she located the iron point. Extracting it required all her concentration and skill, the man's involuntary twitches making the delicate work even more challenging. By the time she removed the third arrow, the least dangerous of the three, having passed clean through the fleshy part of his side without hitting any vital organs, the sun had set, and she worked by firelight alone. Her patient had fallen into a deeper unconsciousness, his body's response to the trauma of arrow removal. His breathing was shallow but regular, his skin hot with fever, but not yet burning with the deadly fire that claimed so many wounded. Morning Star cleaned each wound thoroughly, packing them with fresh herbs and binding them with strips of clean cloth she had traded for months ago with a Mexican healer. The white man would need fresh dressings at least twice daily, constant monitoring for fever and infection, and medicines to help his body fight the inevitable corruption that followed. Such injuries, if he survived the night, it would be the first victory in a long battle. If his spirit was strong enough, if infection didn't take hold too deeply, if no arrow fragment remained to poison his blood, many ifs stood between this man and recovery. As Morning Star finished binding the last wound, she studied his face. In the flickering firelight, who was he? What was his story? Why had he been traveling with these families across Comanche territory? And more importantly, why had she risked everything to save him? She had no answers, only a bone-deep certainty that this man's life was somehow connected to her own. That saving him was part of a pattern the Great Spirit was weaving, though she couldn't yet see its design. Morning Star settled beside the fire, preparing herself for a long night of vigilance. As darkness wrapped itself around the small lodge, she began to sing softly, a healing song taught to her by Old Crow Woman, its ancient words asking the spirits to strengthen the wounded, to guide their journey back from the Shadowlands. Outside, a coyote added its voice to her song, a reminder that in this wild country, life and death were never far apart, and every soul walked a path balanced between the two. Nathan Caldwell's return to consciousness came in fragments, disconnected. Sensations that floated through the darkness of his mind, like debris on a midnight river. First came the pain, a constant companion that anchored him to his physical form when he might have drifted away entirely. Then smell, smoke flavored with unfamiliar herbs, the earthy scent of cured hides, the copper tang of his own blood. Sound. Followed the soft crackling of a small fire, the whisper of wind through leaves, and something else, a woman's voice, singing in a language he didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, rising and falling like the plains themselves, somehow both mournful and resolute. When he finally managed to force his eyes open, Nathan saw only blurred shapes and indistinct colors. He blinked slowly, each movement requiring deliberate effort until the world gradually came into focus. He lay in a small lodge of some kind, not a white man's cabin, but a native dwelling. Buffalo hides stretched overhead, smoke curling toward an opening at the peak. The fire pit beside him held glowing coals rather than flames, providing warmth without excessive light. Across that fire sat a woman, her copper skin and black hair marking her as Indian, though in his confused state, Nathan couldn't immediately identify which tribe. She was grinding something in a stone mortar, her movements precise and practiced. She hadn't noticed that he was awake, giving him a moment to observe her undetected. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones and eyes that tilted slightly upward at the corners. Her buckskin dress was adorned with simple beadwork, nothing like the elaborate decorations worn by tribal women on ceremonial occasions. This was everyday clothing, functional, rather than decorative. Around her neck hung a medicine pouch, identifying her as a healer. As this realization penetrated Nathan's fog-shrouded mind, memories crashed back with brutal force. The wagon train, the attack, the screams of dying families. Emma Tucker's small body crumpling to the ground, his own futile charge, the arrows, striking him from behind. He should be dead. By all rights, his scalp should be decorating some warrior's lance. Instead, he was alive, in what appeared to be a Comanche healing lodge, being tended by a tribal medicine woman. The contradiction was so profound that for a moment Nathan wondered if this was some strange purgatory, neither heaven nor hell, but a realm between, where nothing made sense. A small sound escaped him. Not quite a groan, barely more than an exhalation, but it was enough to alert the woman to his consciousness. She looked up sharply, her eyes meeting his, with an expression of surprise quickly masked by professional assessment. "You wake?" she said in heavily accented English. "Good. Spirit's not ready for you yet." Nathan tried to speak, but his throat was parched, producing only a dry rasp. The woman rose immediately, moving to a water skin hanging near the lodge entrance. She returned to kneel beside him, supporting his head with surprising strength as she held the skin to his lips. The water was cool and fresh, the sweetest thing Nathan had ever tasted. He drank greedily until she pulled it away. "Slow," she cautioned. "Too much, stomach rebel." When he tried again to speak, his voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. "Why?" She understood the single-word question, tilting her head as she considered. Her answer, "Medicine women heal. This my purpose." "I'm white," Nathan managed, the effort of speaking sending shards of pain through his chest. "Body same inside," she replied with a small shrug. "Red blood, white blood, all need breath, water, food. All can heal if spirit's willing." It wasn't the answer he'd expected. Nathan had spent enough time in the territories to know the animosity between Comanche and settlers ran deeper than any river and burned hotter than any prairie fire. For this woman to risk treating him, a white man, went against everything he thought he knew about tribal ways. "Others?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sadness flickered across her face. "Only you live. All others gone to spirit world." Nathan closed his eyes, grief washing over him in a wave that threatened to pull him back into unconsciousness. 15 souls entrusted to his guidance and protection, now dead because he'd failed to convince Tucker to turn back when he'd first spotted Comanche sign. The healer seemed to sense his thoughts. "Not your fault," she said firmly. "Many warriors, few guns, no chance." "My job to protect them," Nathan rasped, anger at himself momentarily overriding his physical pain. "I knew the risk." "Then why come?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. Why bring families through Comanche lands? It was a fair question, one that Nathan had asked himself repeatedly during the journey. People needed to reach settlements west, he said finally. Cavalry escort was delayed. Tucker, Wagon Master, decided to push on rather than wait. The woman nodded, understanding the impatience of white settlers who viewed the land as something to be claimed and tamed rather than lived with in harmony. Bad choice, she observed simply. Yes, Nathan agreed, the word carrying the weight of 15 lives. A spasm of pain shot through his back, reminding him of the arrows that had brought him down. His hand instinctively moved toward the wound, but the woman caught his wrist. No touch, she instructed. Wounds clean but angry. Need rest medicine. She released his wrist and returned to the mortar and pestle. I am Morning Star, she added, seemingly as an afterthought. Nathan Caldwell, he replied. The simple exchange of names feeling strangely significant in this context. A human connection across a divide of blood and history. Morning Star nodded, accepting his name without comment. As she continued grinding herbs, the rhythmic sound filled the small lodge, oddly soothing in its consistency. How bad? Nathan asked after a moment, needing to understand the extent of his injuries. 3 arrows, Morning Star replied matter-of-factly. 1 here. She touched. A spot below her right shoulder, 1 low back, 1 side, all out now, no poison on tips, good fortune. But deep wounds, much blood lost, fever come soon, test your strength. The clinical assessment would have been alarming if delivered in a different tone, but Morning Star's calm confidence was reassuring. She spoke of his wounds not as death sentences, but as challenges to be overcome. Why am I here? Nathan asked, gesturing weakly to indicate the lodge. Not your village. A shadow passed over Morning Star's face. My people not accept white man in camp. Chief Broken Hand declare all whites enemies after soldiers attack winter camp 2 summers past. Kill many women, children. She met his gaze directly. If warriors know I heal you, both die. The enormity of her risk struck Nathan with sudden clarity. This woman wasn't just treating an enemy's wounds, she was defying her tribe's leadership, placing herself in mortal danger for the sake of a stranger who, by all tribal logic, deserved to die. Then why? He pressed, needing to understand her motivation. Morning Star was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling on the mortar. When she finally spoke, her voice had taken on a different quality, as if she were quoting someone else's words. Old Crow woman, my teachers say, healer must follow spirit path, not war path. Say medicine gift, come with duty to all who suffer. She touched the medicine pouch at her neck. Last winter, as she walked to spirit world, she tell me, great change. Coming, you part of this change. Remember healing stronger than hatred. Her dark eyes met Nathan's, a depth of conviction in them that transcended language and cultural barriers. I not understand then, still not understand fully, but when I find you, when I see you breathe when should be dead, I know this part of path Old Crow woman speak of. Nathan absorbed her words, trying to reconcile them with everything he thought. He knew about the Comanche. The newspapers and dime novels painted them as bloodthirsty savages, incapable of compassion or higher reasoning. Yet here was this woman, risking everything to follow a moral code as complex and nuanced as any Christian doctrine. How long? He asked, changing the subject as weariness began to overtake him again. Since attack? 3 days, Morning Star replied. You sleep much, good for healing. 3 days. 3 days of unconsciousness, while this woman tended his wounds, watched over his fever, kept him alive through skills passed down through countless generations. 3 days during which she could have slit his throat and no one would ever have known what became of Nathan Caldwell. Thank you, he said, the simple words wholly inadequate for what she had done. Morning Star acknowledged his gratitude with a slight nod, then dipped a wooden cup into the mixture she'd been grinding. "Drink," she instructed, again supporting. His head. "Help pain, fight sickness in blood." The concoction was bitter, with undertones of earthy sweetness that didn't quite mask the medicinal taste. Nathan drank it without complaint, having learned long ago that effective medicines rarely tasted pleasant. As the herbs began to take effect, dulling the sharp edges of his pain and drawing him back toward sleep, Nathan found himself studying Morning Star's profile as she tended the fire. There was a quiet dignity in her movements, a centered calm that suggested inner strength rather than passive acceptance. In his last moments of consciousness before the medicine pulled him under, Nathan wondered at the strange turns of fate that had brought him here, the sole survivor of a massacre, his life in the hands of a woman whose people had killed everyone he was sworn to protect. The irony was as bitter as the herbal mixture, yet somehow fitting in this land where beauty and brutality walked hand in hand. His last thought before darkness reclaimed him was simple but profound. If he survived, nothing would ever be the same. Again, the fever came, as Morning Star had predicted, striking with the suddenness of a summer thunderstorm. One moment Nathan was lucid, sipping a broth she had prepared from prairie herbs and dried buffalo meat. The next, he was burning, his skin dry as sun-baked clay, his eyes bright with the unnatural fire that consumed him from within. Morning Star had been expecting this battle, had prepared for it as methodically as any warrior readying for combat. Infection was the true enemy in arrow wounds, deadlier than the initial injury, more persistent than blood loss. Once corruption entered the blood, only the strongest survived, and even then, the margin between life and death was thin as a blade. "Of grass, fight," she commanded as Nathan thrashed against the firs, his body arching in pain, words spilling from his lips in senseless streams. "Your spirit strong, must be stronger than fever." She worked tirelessly as the day progressed into night, and then another day, cooling his body with cloths soaked in the spring's cold water, forcing herbal teas between his cracked lips when moments of stillness allowed. She burned sacred sage, filling the lodge with purifying smoke, and sang the healing songs passed down through generations of her people. Throughout his delirium, Nathan traveled through landscapes of memory and nightmare, the boundaries between past and present dissolving in the crucible of fever. Sometimes he was a boy again in Kentucky, following his father through autumn forests in search of game. Other times he was back at Serpent Creek, reliving the massacre in horrific detail, each death playing out in slow, torturous clarity. He called out names: Elizabeth, Thomas, Sarah, people from his past whom Morning Star did not know. He begged forgiveness from the dead of the wagon train, reciting their names like a litany of personal failure. Tucker, Emma, Miller, the Wright, family. And sometimes, in rare moments of partial lucidity, he spoke directly to Morning Star, though whether he truly saw her or some fever-conjured apparition, she couldn't tell. "Why did they spare me?" he asked during one such moment, his blue eyes fever-bright yet focused on her face. "Why am I alive when all the others died?" Morning Star bathed his forehead with a cool cloth, choosing her words carefully. "Not spared. Left for dead. Different thing." "No different to them," Nathan insisted, his voice hoarse with thirst and emotion. "They're still gone. Every last one." "You live for reason," Morning Star countered. "Great Spirit not finished with your path." A bitter laugh escaped him, triggering a coughing fit that left him gasping. "What path? Leading people to their deaths? I've been walking a road to nowhere since the war ended." The war. This was new information, a piece of the puzzle that was Nathan Caldwell. Morning Star filed it away, gradually assembling an understanding of this complex man fate had placed in her care. "Which war?" she asked, helping him drink more tea. "The only one that matters," he replied, a southern drawl becoming more pronounced in his weakened state. "War between the states. Fought for the Confederacy, 4 years of blood and madness. His eyes took on a faraway look. When it ended, couldn't go home to Kentucky. Too many ghosts, too much lost. The Civil War. Morning Star knew of it, though it had touched her people only indirectly. While white men slaughtered each other over slavery and states' rights, the Comanche had continued their own desperate struggle against encroachment on their hunting grounds, the two conflicts existing in parallel but separate realities. "So you come west," she prompted, keeping him talking, sensing his need to unburden himself. Nathan nodded weakly. "Drifted, Texas, New Mexico territory, Colorado. Took work where I could find it. Guide, hunter, scout." A shadow crossed his face. "Sometimes for the army." Morningstar's hand stilled on the cloth. "You scout for bluecoats, against my people." A complex emotion flickered in Nathan's eyes. Shame, defiance, regret. Sometimes it was that, or starve. He met her gaze directly, despite the fever clouding his mind. Never led them to camps with women and children, drew the line there. Morningstar absorbed this revelation, feeling its weight. This man had been an enemy of her people, had guided soldiers through Comanche territory, perhaps even contributed to battles where her tribesmen had fallen. Yet he claimed to have maintained some moral boundary, refusing to participate in the massacres of non-combatants that had become increasingly common as the war for the plains intensified. Could she believe him? Or was this the self-justification of a guilty conscience? Before she could pursue the matter further, Nathan's tenuous lucidity slipped away, his eyes rolling back as the fever reclaimed him. His breathing became labored, his skin hotter than the cooking stones beside the fire. This was the crisis point, the moment when many wounded succumbed, their bodies simply unable to continue the fight against infection. Morningstar reached for her most potent medicine, a preparation she had been saving as a last resort. Made from the root of the echinacea plant, mixed with other herbs, according to a formula old Crow woman had guarded jealously, it was both powerful and dangerous. It could strengthen the body's battle against corruption in the blood, but if the patient was too weak, it could overwhelm the heart, hastening death rather than preventing it. She hesitated, weighing Nathan's strength against the severity of his fever. He was strong for a white man, his body hardened by years of outdoor living, but the arrows had taken a heavy toll. The fever had been raging for nearly 2 days now, sapping his reserves. Yet something in Morningstar rebelled against the thought of losing him now, after all her efforts to keep him alive. She had risked everything to save this man. She would not surrender him to fever without employing every weapon in her healer's arsenal. Decision made, she measured the precious medicine into a wooden cup, diluting it slightly with water before bringing it to Nathan's lips. He struggled at first, turning his head away from the bitter taste, but Morningstar was insistent, forcing small sips between his clenched teeth. "Drink," she commanded. "Medicine strong, like you must be." When the cup was empty, Morningstar settled back to wait, knowing the next few hours would determine whether Nathan Caldwell lived or died. There was nothing more she could do now except maintain her vigil and continue her healing songs. Outside the lodge, twilight deepened into true darkness. An owl called from the cottonwoods, its mournful voice a reminder that death was never far, away in this harsh land. Within the lodge, the fire burned low, shadows dancing across the still form on the fur pallet and the solitary woman who knelt beside him. Morningstar dozed fitfully as the night progressed, waking frequently to check Nathan's breathing and feel his forehead. Near dawn, she noticed a change. His skin was damp with sweat, the unnatural heat beginning to dissipate as his body fought back against the infection. His breathing, while still shallow, had become more regular, less labored. The powerful medicine was working. The fever had broken. Relief washed over Morningstar, so intense it left her trembling. She hadn't realized until that moment how deeply invested she had become in this white man's survival, how intricately her own fate seemed tied to his. The vision that had led her to search the massacre site, to find this sole survivor, and risk everything to heal him. It had become more than a healer's duty. It had become personal. As the first light of dawn filtered through the smoke hole, Nathan's eyes opened, clear for the first time since the fever had taken hold. He looked at Morningstar with lucid recognition, his gaze steady despite his exhaustion. "You're still here," he said, his voice a bare whisper. "Where else would I be?" she replied, offering him water which he drank with the desperate thirst of a man returning from the desert. "Thought you might have been a dream," Nathan admitted when he had drunk his fill. "Or that you'd come to your senses and left me to die." Morningstar shook her head, a hint of amusement softening her features. "Not dream. And leaving you to die after all this work?" She made a dismissive gesture. "Bad medicine. Waste of good herbs." A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's cracked lips. "Can't argue with that logic." His expression sobered. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough," Morningstar acknowledged. "But fever broken now. Worst danger past." Nathan's eyes held hers for a long moment, unspoken questions in their depths. How much? Did he remember of his fever-induced confessions? Did he recall telling her about his Confederate past, his work for the army? Morningstar met his gaze steadily, neither acknowledging nor denying that their relationship had shifted, deepened during his delirium. "Thank you," he said finally, the simple words carrying the weight of a life debt. Morningstar inclined her head slightly, accepting his gratitude without diminishing it. "Rest now," she instructed, rising to her feet. "Must check snares, gather more herbs. Back soon." As she ducked through the lodge entrance into the fresh morning air, Morningstar felt a curious lightness in her chest. The white man would live. Whatever consequences might come from her decision to save him, and she harbored no illusions that there would be consequences. At least she had not failed in her healer's duty. What came next would be in the hands of the Great Spirit. All she could do was follow the path as it unfolded before her, one step at a time. The days that followed the breaking of Nathan's fever established a rhythm between healer and patient, a careful dance of recovery. Morningstar changed his bandages twice daily, applying fresh poultices of herbs to draw out any remaining infection. She prepared broths, strengthened with medicinal plants, coaxing Nathan to consume more each day, rebuilding the strength fever had stolen from him. For his part, Nathan proved to be a surprisingly cooperative patient. Unlike many white men, Morningstar had observed during her apprenticeship with Old Crow Woman, he didn't question her methods or dismiss her herbal knowledge as primitive superstition. Perhaps his years in the territories had taught him respect for native ways, or perhaps his brush with death had simply humbled him. Whatever the reason, he accepted her care with quiet gratitude. "Where did you learn English?" he asked one morning, as Morningstar helped him sit up, supporting his back while she checked his wounds. It was the first time he'd inquired about her personally rather than his own condition. "Trade post near Fort Sill," she replied, her fingers gently probing the healing arrow wound below his shoulder blade. No heat, no swelling. A good sign. "Old Crow Woman and I visit when I young. She trade medicines with white doctor there. Doctor's wife teach me words, writing." "You can write?" Nathan couldn't hide his surprise. Morningstar nodded, a hint of pride in her expression. "In English and Comanche signs. Old Crow Woman say knowledge is strength, even enemies' knowledge. Smart woman, your teacher. Wisest of our people," Morningstar agreed, a shadow crossing her face. "Many moons since she walked to spirit world. I miss her guidance." Nathan winced slightly as she began applying a fresh poultice, the mixture stinging despite its healing properties. "You seem to be doing fine on your own. I'd be dead without your skills." Morningstar secured the bandage in place before helping Nathan ease back down onto the furs. "Not just my skills, your will to live strong. Some wounded give up. Let spirit fly away. You fight." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the lodge's smoke hole above. "Not sure why," he admitted finally. "Not much waiting for me out there. No family, no home. Just another drifter in a land full of them." "Yet you live," Morningstar pointed out. "Great Spirit not finished with you." Their conversations often took this philosophical turn, touching on fate and purpose, the invisible forces that shaped their lives. Morningstar spoke of the Great Spirit's design, while Nathan, though raised Protestant, expressed a more fatalistic view born of war and hard years on the frontier. Despite their different perspectives, these talks forged a connection between them that transcended the roles of healer and patient. They were two solitary souls, adrift in a changing world, finding in each other an unexpected understanding. By the 10th day after the fever broke, Nathan was strong enough to stand briefly, leaning heavily on Morningstar's shoulder as they made a slow circuit of the lodge's interior. His legs trembled with the effort, muscles weakened by extended immobility, but determination set his jaw as he forced one foot in front of the other. "Better than yesterday," Morningstar observed as she helped him back to his pallet. "Not good. Enough," Nathan replied, frustration evident in his voice. "I'm still useless." "Patience," she counseled. "Body knows how to heal, cannot rush." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his beard, which had grown unchecked during his convalescence. "Patience was never my strong suit, even before I had a Comanche healer risking her life to keep me alive." His comment touched on the reality they both acknowledged but rarely discussed directly. Every day, Morningstar remained with Nathan was another day she risked discovery by her people. Though her healing lodge was remote, someone from the tribe might eventually come looking for her, a relative checking on her welfare, a warrior seeking her medical skills, or simply a hunter passing through who might spot smoke from her fire. Nathan's growing strength only complicated matters. Once he was well enough to travel, what then? He couldn't simply walk into the nearest white settlement, not in Comanche territory. The nearest fort was a 4-day ride through country patrolled by warriors who would kill him on sight. Yet remaining with Morningstar indefinitely wasn't an option either. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, voicing the thought that had been weighing on both their minds. Morningstar nodded, her expression solemn. "When you're strong enough to ride, you must go east to fort. And you, return to my people." Her tone suggested this was the only possible answer, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Nathan studied her face, seeing beyond her composed exterior to the conflict beneath. "They'll ask where you've been all this time. We'll say I had vision, quest, needed solitude for new medicines." She looked away, her discomfort with the deception evident. "Not complete lie. This time has been learning." Nathan felt a pang of guilt, recognizing the position he had put her in simply by surviving. Morningstar would have to lie to her tribe, violating the honesty valued in her culture, to protect both him and herself. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "For what?" "For making you choose between your healer's oath and your people's laws. For putting you in danger." Morningstar was silent for a long moment, considering his words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a certainty that brooked no argument. "I choose. No one force my hand. Old crow woman teach. Healer must listen to spirit voice inside, even when path difficult." She touched the medicine pouch at her neck, a gesture Nathan had come to recognize as her connection to her mentor's memory. "I hear voice when I find you at Massacre. Say this man important, must live. The conviction in her words stirred something. In Nathan, not just gratitude but a sense of obligation. If Morning Star believed so strongly in his significance, perhaps there was indeed some purpose to his survival, some meaning to be found beyond mere chance. Before he could pursue this thought, Morning Star's posture suddenly changed. Her body, tensing as she tilted her head toward the lodge entrance, Nathan instantly recognized the alertness of someone who had detected danger. "What is it?" he whispered, automatically reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Morning Star raised her hand. For silence, her keen hearing focused on sounds beyond Nathan's perception. After a tense moment, she moved soundlessly to the lodge entrance, lifting the flap just enough to peer outside. When she turned back, her expression was grim. Riders coming. 3 warriors. Nathan's heart hammered against his ribs. Your people. She nodded, already moving with swift efficiency, gathering evidence of his presence. Must hide you, now! The lodge was small, with few places to conceal a full-grown man. Morning Star quickly rearranged the furs where Nathan had been lying, piling them against the far wall of the lodge and covering them with a painted buffalo hide used for ceremonial purposes. The sacred nature of the item would discourage casual inspection. Behind these, she directed, helping Nathan move despite his protesting wounds. Stay still, silent, no matter what here. Nathan positioned himself awkwardly in the cramped space, the effort sending jolts of pain through his healing injuries. Morning Star covered him with additional hides, creating a nook that would appear to be simply storage to a casual observer. What if they search? Nathan whispered as she worked. Medicine Lodge, sacred space. Warriors respect boundaries. But uncertainty tinged her voice. Rules were changing in these desperate times as the Comanche fought for their very survival against white encroachment. Traditional taboos might not hold as firmly as they once did. With a final adjustment to ensure Nathan was completely hidden, Morning Star moved away, quickly tidying the lodge to remove any sign of a second occupant. She had just settled beside the fire, arranging her medicinal plants as if in the middle of preparing remedies, when voices called from outside. Nathan, concealed beneath the hides, could not see what transpired, but he could hear the exchange. The warriors addressed Morning Star in Comanche, their tones respectful but insistent. She responded with calm authority, the cadence of her voice revealing none of the tension Nathan knew she must be feeling. The conversation continued for what seemed an eternity to Nathan, his muscles cramping from holding perfectly still, sweat beading on his forehead despite the coolness of his hiding place. He caught his own name, or rather white people in general, mentioned several times, the warriors' voices taking on harder edges when discussing the bluecoats and settlers. Finally, after one last exchange, he heard the warriors withdraw. Morning Star did not immediately return to free him, however. Long minutes passed in silence, Nathan hardly daring to breathe. When the hide was finally pulled back, revealing Morning Star's face tight with concern, Nathan exhaled shakily. That was close. Too close, she agreed, helping him emerge from his cramped hiding place. They search for me, worried when gone so long from village. What did you tell them? Morning Star began rearranging the furs into Nathan's pallet again, her movements betraying her agitation, though her voice remained steady. That I seek new medicine plants, have vision that keep me in mountains. They believe, but... Nathan prompted when she trailed off. She met his eyes directly, no longer bothering to hide her concern. They bring news. Army patrol attack hunting party 3 days ago. Killed 2 warriors, 1 chief's son. Chief call for vengeance raid on fort. Nathan absorbed this information with growing dread. Which fort? Fort Griffin. Where you must go when strong enough. The implications settled between them like a physical weight. Nathan's escape route was about to become the target of a Comanche revenge raid, potentially cutting off his only path to safety among his own people. "When?" he asked. "2 days, maybe 3. Morningstar's hands stilled on the furs. "Warriors. Must be returned to village tonight. Need healer, prepare for raid, make war medicine." Nathan felt as if the ground had suddenly dropped away beneath him. "You have to go?" It wasn't a question, but Morningstar nodded anyway, conflict evident in every line of her body. "Must go, cannot refuse without raising suspicion." "What about—" Nathan gestured to his still healing wounds. "Leave medicines, instructions." She looked around the lodge, mentally cataloguing what he would need. "You strong enough now to tend yourself for few days. When warriors leave for raid, I try return." The plan had too many uncertainties, too many ways it could go wrong, but neither of them had better options. Nathan would have to fend for himself, while Morningstar returned to her village to maintain her cover, potentially participating in preparations for a raid that might kill white soldiers, men like those Nathan had once guided through this very territory. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the growing complexity of his relationship with this Comanche healer who had saved his life, but now faced divided loyalties that would test them both. The preparation for Morningstar's departure was hurried but methodical. She arranged medicines in neat rows, each bundle wrapped in leaf packets with distinct markings to identify their contents. As she worked, she provided Nathan with precise instructions, her tone shifting from companion to teacher. "Yellow flowers for pain. Chew small amount, not too much, or head swim." She demonstrated the proper portion between her fingers. "Dark root for infection, if wounds grow hot again. Boil in water, drink, and place wet pulp on bandage." Nathan listened, intently, committing each detail to memory. His life would depend on correctly following her guidance while she was gone. "How long will you be away?" Morningstar paused, uncertainty flickering across her features. "Cannot know. 2 days, maybe. More. Must convince Chief I return only for raid preparations, then come back to continue medicine quest. And if he doesn't believe you?" She met his gaze directly. "Then I not return." The blunt assessment hung between them, acknowledging the precariousness of their situation. Morningstar was risking her standing in the tribe, possibly even her life, by helping Nathan. One misstep, one suspicion raised, and everything could unravel. "You should bring me a weapon," Nathan said, his mind calculating risks and contingencies. "Just in case." Morningstar nodded, disappearing briefly outside the lodge, before returning with a bone-handled knife and a small bow with a handful of arrows. "Not much. Best I can spare without questions." Nathan accepted the weapons, testing the knife's edge with his thumb. Sharp enough for defense, though against multiple warriors it would offer little protection. The bow was small, designed for a woman's frame rather than his broader shoulders, but it would suffice for hunting small game. More importantly, it provided some means of defending himself if discovered. "I'll manage," he assured her, though they both recognized the hollow optimism in his words. As Morningstar continued her preparations, checking that the water skin was full and that enough firewood was stacked within Nathan's reach, a tense silence settled between them. There were too many unspoken fears, too many possibilities neither wished to voice aloud. "You saved my life," Nathan said finally as she knelt to secure the medicine packets. "I won't forget that, whatever happens." Morningstar glanced up, something softening in her expression. "Old Crow woman say life debt sacred bond, stronger than tribe, stronger than blood." She touched his arm briefly, the first gesture of physical connection she had initiated that wasn't related to his medical care. "Be careful. Trust instincts." With that, she rose, gathering her minimal travel provisions into a small parfleche bag. At the lodge entrance, She paused, looking back at Nathan. For a moment it seemed she might say something more, but instead she simply nodded once, then ducked through the opening and was gone. Nathan listened to the receding hoofbeats of her pony until the sound faded completely, leaving him in a silence more profound than any he'd experienced since awakening in her care. The lodge, which had come to feel almost comfortable during his convalescence, suddenly seemed alien again, a space where he didn't belong, surrounded by a territory that wanted him dead. Moving carefully to avoid reopening his wounds, Nathan tested his strength by making a slow circuit of the lodge's interior. His legs trembled with the effort, but less than before. The fever had taken its toll, but his body was recovering. He examined the healing arrows wounds using a polished metal mirror Morning Star had left him. The entry points were closed over with fresh pink skin, though deep bruising still mottled. His back and side, movement remained painful, but the sharp, fiery agony of infection had subsided to a more manageable discomfort. Nathan knew he was far from fully healed. In the white settlements, a doctor would have prescribed weeks more rest before allowing a patient with such injuries to travel. But time was a luxury he couldn't afford. If Morning Star's information about the planned raid was accurate, Fort Griffin would be under attack within days. He needed to regain enough strength to at least consider making the journey eastward. If she didn't return, the thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. The idea of abandoning Morning Star after all she had risked for him was repugnant. Yet what choice would he have if she didn't come back? Remain in the lodge until discovered by Comanche hunters? Attempt to reach the fort despite his weakened condition? These unanswerable questions plagued Nathan throughout the day as he forced himself through small exercises, walking the lodge's perimeter, drawing the small bow to test his arm strength, practicing standing from a seated position without support. Each activity left him exhausted but determined to push further the next time. As evening approached, Nathan built up the fire and prepared a simple meal from the provisions Morning Star had left. The activity of cooking, mundane as it was, provided distraction from his concerns and a small sense of normalcy in his uncertain circumstances. Night fell, the familiar sounds of the wilderness replacing daylight's relative quiet. The hunting, call of an owl, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush. Nathan kept the fire low, mindful that its light might attract unwanted attention, and positioned himself where he could observe the lodge entrance. While remaining in shadow, sleep came in fitful bursts, his body demanding rest, while his mind remained vigilant. Each unusual sound jerked him to alertness. Hand reaching for the knife kept always within reach. By dawn, fatigue had settled into his bones, combining with the persistent ache of his injuries to create a profound weariness. The day stretched. Before him, empty of purpose beyond his continued recovery exercises and the basic tasks of survival. Nathan had never been a man comfortable with idleness. Even in the worst days after the war, he had kept moving, working, occupying his hands, if not his mind. This enforced inactivity, necessary as it was, grated against his nature. To pass the time, he began fashioning crude arrows from branches gathered near the lodge entrance, using skills learned from both white frontiersmen and native guides during his years in the territories. The materials were far from ideal, but the repetitive task of stripping bark, straightening shafts, and attaching points fashioned from bone scraps provided both mental focus and potentially useful weapons. By midday, Nathan had produced 6 serviceable arrows and improved his facility with the small bow despite the strain it placed on his healing back muscles. The accomplishment was minor but satisfying, a small victory over his circumstances. As he worked, his thoughts continually returned to Morning Star and what might be occurring in her village. Was she successful in maintaining her deception? Had the warriors accepted her story of a medicine quest? Was the raid on Fort Griffin proceeding as planned? The questions had no answers, yet Nathan couldn't banish them from his mind. In the space of weeks, this Comanche healer had transformed from enemy to savior to what? Not quite friend, not exactly ally, but something for which Nathan had no adequate term. Someone who had seen him at his most vulnerable and chosen to preserve his life rather than take it, bridging a divide he had thought uncrossable. On the third day of Morningstar's absence, Nathan woke to an unexpected sound, the distant thunder of hooves, many more than a single rider would produce. Moving with urgency that overrode his body's protests, he extinguished the small morning fire and gathered his minimal weapons. The sound grew closer, resolving into what Nathan estimated to be 15 to 20 riders approaching at a gallop. Too many for a hunting party. Warriors, then, possibly the very war party heading to raid Fort Griffin. Nathan quickly concealed himself behind the lodge's rear wall, where a natural depression in the earth offered minimal cover. It wasn't an ideal hiding place, but it provided a vantage point to observe anyone approaching the lodge, while giving him a slim chance of remaining undetected. The riders entered the small valley at full speed, their ponies' hooves kicking up. Dust as they thundered past the cottonwood grove. Nathan held his breath, pressing himself closer to the ground, praying they would continue on their way without investigating the lodge. His hopes were dashed when the lead rider raised his hand, bringing the party to a halt mere 100 yards from where Nathan lay concealed. The warrior pointed toward the lodge, speaking rapidly to his companions. 3 riders detached from the main group, approaching the structure with weapons ready. Nathan's hand tightened on his knife, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain it could be heard across the distance. Discovery meant certain death. If he was fortunate, a quick one. Warriors circled the lodge once, then one dismounted and ducked inside. Long moments passed, Nathan scarcely daring to breathe as he waited for the inevitable shout that would announce his detection. Instead, the warrior emerged, shaking his head and gesturing to indicate the lodge was empty. He rejoined his companions, and after a brief consultation, all 3 returned to the main party. Words were exchanged with the leader, who looked toward the lodge one final time before raising his arm in a signal to move out. The war party departed as swiftly as it had arrived, heading eastward along a trail that Nathan knew eventually connected to the main route to Fort Griffin. He remained motionless long after the sound of hooves had faded, his muscles cramping from the sustained tension, sweat cooling on his skin despite the day's growing heat. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did Nathan release his grip on the knife, his fingers stiff from clutching it so tightly. He had escaped discovery by the narrowest of margins, saved only by the warrior's cursory inspection of the lodge. But their direction of travel confirmed Morningstar's intelligence. They were indeed heading toward Fort Griffin, a day's ride away at their current pace. By tomorrow, they would attack the fort where Nathan had hoped to find sanctuary, and Morningstar had not been among them. The realization struck Nathan with unexpected force. He had assumed she would be required to accompany the war party as healer, preparing medicines and performing rituals before battle. Her absence could mean many things: that she had somehow avoided the obligation, that she had been prevented from joining them, or worst of all, that her deception had been discovered. Regardless of the reason, the war party's passage changed Nathan's calculations. If they were successful in their raid, the fort might be destroyed, or at least severely damaged, eliminating his best hope for reaching white civilization safely. If they were repelled, survivors would likely return along this same route, wounded and angry, making this area even more dangerous. Nathan needed to make a decision, remain in the relative safety of the lodge, hoping for Morningstar's return, or attempt to reach the fort before the attack, possibly warning the soldiers in time to prepare better defenses. The second option tempted him. It aligned with his training, his experience, his instinct to act rather than wait. Yet it presented its own dangers beyond the physical challenge of traveling in his weakened condition. If he warned the fort and soldiers killed warriors from Morning Star's tribe, perhaps even people close to her, would he be betraying the woman who had saved his life? The moral complexity of his situation weighed on Nathan as he made his way back inside the lodge. There were no clean choices here, no path that didn't require sacrificing something or someone. In saving him, Morning Star had drawn him into her world, connecting their fates in ways neither had anticipated. Whatever decision he made would have consequences that would reach far beyond his own survival. Dawn broke with the clarity that follows. A night of internal struggle. Nathan had barely slept, weighing his options until they wore grooves in his mind. By first light, he had reached his decision. One born not of certainty but of necessity, he would attempt to reach Fort Griffin. The choice was not made lightly. His body remained far from healed, and the journey would test his endurance beyond anything he had asked of himself since the war. Moreover, warning the soldiers meant potentially contributing to the deaths of warriors from Morning Star's tribe, men connected to the woman who had saved his life. Yet the alternative sat even worse with his conscience. To remain passive while knowing an attack was coming, to allow unsuspecting soldiers and civilians at the fort to face death without warning, violated everything Nathan had ever believed about a man's duty. "I'm sorry," he said aloud to the empty lodge, as if Morning Star might somehow hear his apology. "I can't just sit and wait." With grim determination, Nathan began preparing for the journey. He gathered the medicines Morning Star had left, wrapping them carefully and placing them in a small pouch that could hang from his belt. The knife she had given him went into a makeshift sheath fashioned from a strip of leather. The small bow and arrows he secured in a bundle that could be carried across his back. Food was the greater concern. Morning Star had left enough provisions for several days in the lodge, but carrying them would be challenging without proper packs or a horse. In the end, Nathan created a crude shoulder bag from one of the smaller hides, filling it with dried meat, a water skin, and a handful of edible roots Morning Star had identified during his recovery. As he worked, Nathan calculated distances and travel times. Fort Griffin lay approximately 30 miles east as the crow flies, but the terrain would make the actual journey longer and more arduous. A healthy man on horseback could cover the distance in a day. On foot and injured as he was, Nathan estimated it would take him at least 2 days, possibly 3. The war party had a significant head start, but they would likely camp before the final approach to the fort, perhaps planning a dawn attack for maximum surprise. If Nathan pushed himself to his limits, there was a slim chance he might reach the fort before the assault began. Before leaving, he took a final tour of the lodge, committing its details to memory. This small dwelling had been his sanctuary, the place where he had fought his way back from death's threshold. Whatever happened next, he would not forget the healing that had occurred within these walls, or the woman who had made it possible. Nathan stepped outside, orienting himself eastward. The morning air carried a hint of autumn crispness, though summer's heat would return as the day progressed. Taking a deep breath that stretched the newly healed tissue across his back, he began walking, each step a deliberate act of will. The first mile tested his resolve. His legs, weakened by weeks of limited movement, protested the sustained effort. The wounds in his back and side throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Every instinct urged him to turn back, to recognize the foolishness of this endeavor. Instead, Nathan focused on placing one foot in front of the other, establishing a rhythm that, while painfully slow, could be maintained. He used his frontier skills to pick the path of least resistance through the landscape, avoiding steep inclines where possible, utilizing game trails that offered clearer passage through the brush. By midday, Nathan had covered perhaps 5 miles, a Pitiful distance for a healthy man, but a victory given his condition. He rested briefly in the shade of a limestone outcropping, consuming a small portion of his provisions and checking his wounds. No fresh bleeding, though the strain had awakened deep aches in muscles and tissues still in the process of knitting themselves back together. As he prepared to continue, a distant sound froze him in place. Hoofbeats, approaching from the direction he had come. Nathan quickly moved behind the outcropping, bow ready, though he harbored few illusions about his chances, if this was another Comanche patrol. The rider appeared over a low rise, and Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Even at a distance, the figure was unmistakable. Morning Star, pushing her pinto mare at a canter, scanning the terrain ahead with obvious urgency. She was searching for him. Nathan hesitated only briefly before stepping into view, waving to catch her attention. Morning Star reined her horse sharply, changing direction to intercept him. As she drew closer, Nathan could see the tension in her posture, the mixture of relief and concern that crossed her features upon finding him. "You should not leave Lodge," she said as she dismounted, her tone more worried than accusatory. "Too weak still, too dangerous." "War party passed by yesterday," Nathan explained. "Heading toward the fort. I saw them." Morning Star nodded grimly. "Why I come find you? Raid happened tomorrow at dawn." She looked pointedly at his makeshift travel pack. "You go warn soldiers." There was no judgment in her question, only a direct assessment of his intentions. Nathan saw no point in denying it. "Yes, I can't just let men die without warning, even if—" He broke off, reluctant to complete the thought. "Even if my people die instead," Morning Star finished for him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," Nathan said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I know what you risked to save me. I know what this means." Morning Star was silent for a long moment, her gaze traveling from Nathan to the eastern horizon and back. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet resignation. "Understand your choice. White men, your people, as Comanche mine." She gestured to his obvious exhaustion. "But you never reach fort in time. Not like this." "I have to try," Nathan insisted. "I owe those men at least that much." "Owe me nothing." The question held no accusation, only curiosity. Nathan met her eyes directly. "I owe you everything. My life, a debt I can never repay. But this isn't about debts. It's about what I can live with." Something shifted in Morning Star's expression then, a recognition or acceptance of the moral framework that guided him. "My father say man must walk own path, even when hard, even when others not understand." She stepped closer, her decision apparently made. "I help you reach fort." The offer stunned Nathan. "Why would you do that? They're your people planning." "The raid?" "Yes, my people." A complexity of emotion crossed her face. "Who not accept me if know I heal white man, who kill you without thought if find you." She touched the medicine pouch at her neck, a gesture Nathan had come to associate with her deepest convictions. "Old Crow woman say healer not warrior, say all blood same color when spill on ground." Nathan absorbed her words, understanding the profound choice she was making. By helping him reach Fort Griffin, Morning Star wasn't just risking discovery. She was actively working against her tribe's military action, potentially saving white lives at the expense of Comanche ones. "You'd be branded a traitor," he said softly. "Perhaps." Her expression remained resolute. "But true to healer path, true to self." She gestured to her horse. "You ride. I guide on foot. Can reach fort by nightfall if leave now." "We'll both ride." Nathan countered. "The horse can carry two for this distance." Morning Star nodded, accepting the compromise. "But I not enter fort. Take you close enough, then return to hills. Already gone from village too long." This arrangement made sense. For Morning Star to actually enter a white military installation would be suicidal, regardless of her intentions. The soldiers, on high alert for Comanche activity, would likely shoot first and ask questions later upon seeing a native woman approaching. With the decision made, they wasted no time in departing. Morning Star helped Nathan mount her pinto mare, then swung up behind him. The arrangement was intimate by necessity, her arms reaching around him to hold the reins, her body providing support for his still weakened frame. As they set off at a steady trot, Nathan found himself acutely aware of her presence, the light pressure of her hands guiding the horse, the rhythm of her breathing against his back, the faint herbal scent that always seemed to accompany her. There was a strange comfort in this closeness, despite the circumstances that had brought them together and the uncertain future that awaited. They rode in silence for the most part, conserving energy and focusing on covering ground as efficiently as possible. Morning Star chose paths that offered both concealment and relatively easy terrain for the horse, demonstrating an intimate knowledge of the landscape that surpassed even Nathan's considerable frontier experience. When they paused briefly to rest, the horse and drink from a small spring, Nathan asked the question that had been troubling him since her return. "How did you get away from the village? I thought you'd be required to join the war party." Morning Star knelt by the spring, refilling their water skin before answering. "Chief asked me prepare war medicine, not ride with warriors. The young healer Water's song will go instead." A shadow crossed her face. "She is cousin, eager for first battle medicine opportunity. And they didn't question why you wanted to return to your medicine quest so quickly. Tell them vision not complete. Say spirits angry if healing journey interrupted." She met Nathan's gaze directly. "Not lie. Visions did come while tending you. Not kind, I expected, but true seeing." Nathan wanted to ask what visions she had experienced, what insights had convinced her to risk everything for a wounded enemy. But the urgency of their journey pushed such questions aside. There would be time for deeper understanding later, if they survived the coming days. As the afternoon progressed, signs of increased military presence became evident. Recent hoofprints from cavalry patrols, a hawk-eyed lookout visible on a distant ridge, the occasional glint of sunlight on metal that indicated observation points. Fort patrol territory now, Morning Star observed as they crested a rise that offered a view of the rolling prairie beyond. Fort itself, beyond next hills, beside river. Nathan nodded, recognizing landmarks from previous journeys through this region. They were perhaps 2 hours from Fort Griffin itself, close enough that they might encounter military scouts at any moment. "We should separate soon," he suggested reluctantly. "It's not safe for you to come closer." Morning Star studied the landscape, considering options. "Ridge there," she said, pointing to a wooded elevation about a mile ahead. "Good place. Can see fort approach. Remain hidden." They proceeded to the designated ridge where dense oak and cottonwood provided cover. From this vantage point, Nathan could make out the distant outline of Fort Griffin's stockade walls and the American flag flying above the main gate. Smoke from cook fires rose in straight columns, indicating a calm evening with little wind, perfect conditions for the dawn attack the Comanche were planning. Morning Star helped Nathan dismount, both of them knowing the moment of parting had arrived. A strange awkwardness fell between them, neither quite knowing how to end this improbable alliance that had saved one life and might now save many more. "What will you do now?" Nathan asked. "Return to lodge, wait for warrior's return. Pretend know nothing of raid." Her eyes held resignation mixed with determination. "Continue healer path, whatever comes." "I'll never be able to repay what you've done," Nathan said, the words heartfelt despite their inadequacy. Morning Star shook her head. "No debt between us. Each choose own path." She reached into her medicine pouch, removing a small object wrapped in soft hide. "Take this, for protection." Nathan unwrapped the bundle to find a small carved stone bear, worn smooth by years of handling. "I can't accept this. It's clearly precious to you. Was old crow woman's. She say bear spirit give strength, encourage, healing. Morning Star closed his fingers around the talisman. Now yours. Remember what happened here. Remember some Comanche heal, not just kill. The gift humbled Nathan, representing as it did a connection to Morning Star's mentor and her healing tradition. I'll treasure it, he promised, and I'll make sure the soldiers know that not all Comanche are enemies, that there are bridge builders among both our peoples. A sad smile touched Morning Star's lips. Good words, but soldiers rarely listen. She mounted her pinto mare with fluid grace. World-changing Nathan Caldwell, old ways dying, new ways painful birth. Before Nathan could respond, Morning Star turned her horse, pausing for one final look at the man she had saved against all logic and tradition. No further words were exchanged. None seemed adequate to the moment. With a slight nod that conveyed both farewell and acknowledgement of all that had transpired between them, she rode away, quickly disappearing among the trees. Nathan watched until she was completely gone from sight. The stone bear clutched in his palm, its solid presence a reminder that the impossible had occurred. A Comanche healer and a white frontiersman had transcended the hatred dividing their peoples. If only. Briefly, then, squaring his shoulders against the renewed ache of his healing wounds, Nathan turned toward Fort Griffin and whatever reception awaited him there. The sun hung low on the horizon as Nathan approached Fort Griffin, casting long shadows across the prairie grass. His progress had slowed considerably since parting with Morning Star, his body protesting each step as fatigue and pain reasserted themselves without her steadying presence. Still, determination drove him forward, one painful stride after another. Fort Griffin stood as a testament to American military presence in Comanche territory, a sturdy stockade enclosing barracks, officers' quarters, storehouses, and a parade ground. 2 blockhouses anchored opposite corners, providing elevated positions from which sentries could observe the surrounding landscape. The American flag hung limp in the still evening air above the main gate. As Nathan drew within half a mile of the fort, movement on the perimeter caught his attention. A mounted patrol of 4 soldiers had emerged from the eastern gate, beginning their evening reconnaissance of the immediate area. Nathan raised his arms, waving to attract their attention, despite the risk that they might shoot first at an unexpected figure approaching in Comanche territory. The patrol spotted him quickly, wheeling their horses in his direction. As they drew closer, rifles raised cautiously, Nathan called out in a voice made hoarse by exertion, "American! Don't shoot!" The soldiers approached warily, surrounding him in a loose formation that maintained both vigilance and a clear line of fire. The sergeant, in charge, a weathered man with a thick mustache and hard eyes, studied Nathan with open suspicion. "Identify yourself," he ordered, rifle still aimed at Nathan's chest. "Nathan Caldwell, scout and guide." Nathan kept his hands visible, aware of how he must appear, gaunt, filthy, dressed in a strange mixture of his own tattered clothing and items Morning Star had provided. "I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Caldwell, the name's familiar." Recognition dawned slowly. "Wait, weren't you guiding that wagon train that went missing about 3 weeks back? Everyone reported killed." "Everyone but me," Nathan confirmed grimly. "And that's why I need to speak with your commander. There's a Comanche war party planning to attack the fort at dawn tomorrow." The sergeant exchanged glances with his men, then made a quick decision. "Daniels, ride ahead and alert Captain Hayes. Tell him we're bringing in a survivor with intelligence about a potential attack." He turned back to Nathan. "Can you ride, Caldwell? You look about ready to collapse." "I'll manage," Nathan replied, though in truth he wasn't certain his body had much more to give. The sergeant dismounted, offering his horse while taking position behind one of his men. Nathan climbed awkwardly into the saddle, his wounds protesting the movement. The short ride to the fort passed in a blur. As they approached the gate, Nathan was vaguely aware of increased activity, men running to positions, orders being shouted, a general alertness spreading through the garrison. Word of a possible attack traveled quickly in frontier outposts where survival depended on readiness. Inside the stockade, Nathan was helped from the horse and led directly to the command building, a sturdy structure at the fort's center. Captain William Hayes, commander of Fort Griffin's garrison, was waiting at the entrance. He was a compact man in his early 40s, with intelligent eyes and the composed demeanor of an officer who had seen his share of frontier crises. "Get him inside," Hayes ordered, noting Nathan's condition with a professional assessment. "And fetch Dr. Morrison." Nathan found himself guided to a chair in the captain's office, a space furnished with military simplicity. A desk, several chairs, maps of the territory pinned to the walls, and a small stove that provided welcome warmth against the evening chill. "Sergeant Williams says you have information about an impending attack," Hayes said without preamble. "But first, are you the same Nathan Caldwell who's guided for the army before? Colonel Mackenzie spoke highly of you." Nathan nodded, accepting the cup of water an orderly had brought. "Yes, sir, though it's been nearly 2 years since I last worked for the military. And more recently, you were guiding civilians. A wagon train that was attacked?" "Yes. 3 weeks ago at Serpent Creek Massacre, I was the only survivor." Nathan took a long drink, the cool water reviving him somewhat. "Left for dead with 3 arrows in me." Hayes's expression remained professional, but his eyes registered both respect for Nathan's survival and curiosity about how it had been accomplished. "Yet here you are. We received reports of the attack from a cavalry patrol that found the site 5 days after it happened. They reported no survivors." "By then, I was gone," Nathan said, choosing his words carefully. "I was helped." Before Hayes could press for details, the fort's doctor arrived, a tall, thin man with spectacles and a perpetually concerned expression. He immediately began examining Nathan, tisking at the healing arrow wounds. "Remarkable," Morrison murmured, as he inspected the nearly healed punctures. "These injuries should have been fatal. The treatment was—" He paused, sniffing at the herbal residue still present around the wounds. "Native medicine. Very sophisticated application." He looked sharply at Nathan. "A Comanche healer treated you?" The directness of the question left little room for evasion. "Yes, after the massacre." This revelation created a momentary silence in the room. Captain Hayes exchanged glances with the doctor, both men clearly struggling to reconcile this information with everything they thought they knew about Comanche-white relations. "That's unusual," Hayes said finally, a masterpiece of understatement. "But we can discuss the details later. You mentioned an attack planned for dawn." Nathan seized the opportunity to focus on the immediate threat. "Yes, sir. A war party of about 20 warriors. They're planning to strike at first light, likely from the eastern approach, where the fort's wall is most vulnerable." "How did you come by this intelligence?" Hayes asked, his tone neutral but eyes sharp. Nathan had prepared for this question during his journey, knowing a careful balance was required, providing enough information to be credible without revealing Morningstar's direct involvement. "While recovering from my wounds, I overheard warriors discussing the planned raid. It's retaliation for an army patrol that killed a chief's son 3 days ago." Hayes nodded grimly. "Lieutenant Parker's patrol encountered a hunting party that turned hostile. 2 warriors killed, including one wearing a chief's son's regalia." He studied Nathan thoughtfully. "And you traveled here, in your condition, to warn us." "It seemed the right thing to do," Nathan replied simply. A ghost of a smile touched Hayes's lips. Well, we're obliged for the warning, though we've been on elevated alert since Parker's encounter. Still, knowing their specific plans and timing is valuable intelligence." He turned to the orderly. "Inform Lieutenant Clark to double the eastern sentries and have all men ready for action by 0400 hours. As the orderly departed, Dr. Morrison completed his examination of Nathan. "These wounds need proper cleaning and fresh bandages," he declared. "And you, Mr. Caldwell, need rest and nourishment. You're suffering from exhaustion and the early stages of dehydration." Hayes nodded agreement. "Doctor, see to Mr. Caldwell's immediate medical needs. Then have him moved to the officers' quarters. There's an empty bunk in Lieutenant Parker's room." He looked directly at Nathan. "Rest tonight. We'll talk more after we've dealt with this attack, assuming it materializes as you've described." Nathan recognized the subtle skepticism in the captain's tone. Hayes wasn't dismissing the warning outright, but neither was he taking it entirely on faith. It was the reasonable caution of a frontier commander who had learned that information, like the territory itself, could be treacherous. "One more question, Caldwell," Hayes said, as Nathan rose to follow the doctor. "This Comanche healer who saved you, why would they do that? And why would they let you go, knowing you might bring information to us?" The question carried layers of implication. Hayes was probing not just for facts, but for Nathan's loyalties, trying to determine if his warning was genuine or part of some more complex deception. Nathan's hand instinctively moved to the carved bear talisman in his pocket, drawing strength from its connection to Morning Star. "Not all Comanche think alike, Captain, just as not all white men do. There are those among them who value healing above war, who follow different paths than their warriors." Hayes considered this answer, then nodded once. "Rest, Caldwell, we'll speak again tomorrow." The doctor led Nathan to the infirmary, a small building near the eastern wall where he methodically cleaned and re-bandaged the arrow wounds. Throughout the procedure, Morrison continued to marvel at the effectiveness of the native healing techniques evident in Nathan's condition. "Whoever treated you knew exactly what they were doing," the doctor commented, as he applied a salve of his own making to the wounds. "These herbal preparations they used. I've studied some native medicine, but this is remarkably advanced. The infection was controlled perfectly." Nathan said nothing, uncomfortable with the doctor's professional curiosity about Morning Star's methods. These were her people's secrets, not meant for white men's textbooks or medical journals. After the examination, Nathan was provided with clean clothing, standard army issue but welcome nevertheless, and escorted to the officers' quarters. Lieutenant Parker's room was sparse but comfortable compared to the healing lodge where Nathan had spent the past weeks. The lieutenant himself was on duty, leaving Nathan alone with his thoughts. Sleep should have come easily given his exhaustion, but Nathan found himself restless despite his body's desperate need for rest. His mind kept returning to Morning Star, wondering if she had reached safety, if she would successfully maintain her cover when the warriors returned from their raid. Likely angry and wounded if Hayes prepared his men as thoroughly as his reputation suggested. Nathan also found the fort's confines strangely suffocating after weeks in Morning Star's lodge. The straight lines and right angles of military construction, the sounds of men moving in formation, the pervasive smell of gunpowder, coffee, and tobacco, all served as sharp reminders that he had returned to the white man's world with its own rigid hierarchies and expectations. He stood at the small window, looking eastward into the gathering darkness, imagining Morning Star somewhere out there, perhaps already back at her healing lodge, perhaps still journeying through the night. The distance between them was measured, not just in miles, but in the vast cultural chasm that their brief connection had temporarily bridged. "Be safe," he whispered, though there was no possibility she could hear him. Sleep finally claimed Nathan in the early hours of the morning, his body simply unable to sustain consciousness any longer. He dreamed of Serpent Creek, of arrows flying and wagons burning. But in this version of the nightmare, Morning Star stood amid the chaos, her hands extended toward him, calling him back from death's precipice with words he couldn't quite understand. He was awakened by the fort's call to arms, a bugle sounding assembly, followed by the rapid movement of soldiers to their defensive positions. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon as Nathan made his way outside, moving stiffly but determined to witness what would unfold. Captain Hayes stood on the walkway above the eastern wall, surveying the terrain through a brass spyglass. He acknowledged Nathan with a brief nod as the scout joined him. "Your intelligence appears accurate, Caldwell," Hayes said, handing over the spyglass. "Movement in the tree line, approximately 300 yards out. Warriors assembling for their charge." Nathan studied the distant tree line, easily picking out the shadows moving among the foliage. The war party was indeed preparing for attack, positioning themselves for what they likely believed would be a surprise assault on a sleeping fort. Instead, they faced a fully alerted garrison with doubled sentries, and every man at his post, rifles loaded and ready. The Comanche's greatest tactical advantage, surprise, had been neutralized before the battle even began. A complex emotion washed over Nathan as he returned the spyglass to Hayes. Relief that the fort was prepared, that lives would likely be saved by his warning. Concern for the warriors about to charge into prepared defenses, and beneath it all, a profound sadness for the ongoing cycle of violence that seemed to have no end in sight. "What will you do?" Nathan asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it nonetheless. Hayes's expression was resolute but not bloodthirsty. "Defend the fort, as is my duty. Though I'd prefer they recognize the situation and withdraw, rather than waste lives in a futile attack." "They won't withdraw," Nathan said quietly. "Not once committed. It's not their way." "Then God help them," Hayes replied, raising his hand to signal the men to ready positions. "Because we certainly won't." As the first light of dawn broke fully across the eastern plains, Nathan stood witness to the inevitable collision of two worlds, one fighting to maintain its traditional way of life, the other imposing a new order. Through superior firepower and unshakable conviction in its own manifest destiny, and somewhere beyond the coming violence, a Comanche healer waited, caught between these worlds just as surely as Nathan himself was. Bridge builders in a time when most were focused only on burning whatever connections might lead to understanding. The attack unfolded exactly as Nathan had anticipated. The Comanche warriors charged from the eastern tree line with the first full light of dawn, their war cries echoing across the open ground as they urged their ponies to full gallop. Sunlight glinted off weapons, lances, bows, and the occasional rifle acquired through trade or taken from fallen enemies. Under different circumstances, it would have been a devastating surprise attack. Instead, the fort's defenders were not only awake but fully positioned, rifles trained on the approaching warriors through gun ports and from atop the eastern wall. Captain Hayes waited until the war party was halfway across the open ground before giving the command to fire. The first volley thundered from the fort's defenses, a coordinated wall of lead that dropped several warriors instantly and sent others reeling from wounds. Nathan watched from the walkway, his expression grave. The attacking force faltered momentarily, clearly surprised by the fort's readiness, but then pressed forward with renewed determination. The distance closed rapidly despite a second volley that claimed more warriors. When the attackers were within 50 yards, Hayes ordered the men to fire at will. The air filled with gun smoke and the sharp cracks of individual rifles, punctuated by the warriors' continuing battle cries. Several Comanche managed to reach the walls, firing arrows upward at defenders visible on the walkway, or attempting to scale the stockade with remarkable courage, despite the deadly fire raining down upon them. "They're too exposed," Nathan murmured. watching as warrior after warrior fell. "This isn't a battle, it's a slaughter." Hayes, directing the defense with cool efficiency, overheard the comment. "They chose the ground and the timing, Caldwell. We're simply defending our position." The captain's assessment was tactically correct, but did nothing to ease the knot in Nathan's stomach as he witnessed the decimation of the war party. His thoughts turned to Morning Star. These were her people dying before him, perhaps relatives or childhood friends, men whose stories she knew, whose families would mourn them. The attack lasted less than 15 minutes. When only a handful of warriors remained, their leader finally signaled retreat. The survivors gathered their wounded where possible and withdrew to the tree line under continued fire from the fort. "Hold fire," Hayes ordered, as the distance between the retreating warriors and the fort increased. "No pursuit. They've learned their lesson." Nathan's gaze remained fixed on the battlefield where fallen warriors lay motionless in the grass. At least a dozen dead, with several more wounded who might not survive the journey back to their camp. Among the U.S. forces, casualties were minimal. 2 soldiers with minor wounds from arrows, none killed. It was exactly the outcome Nathan's warning had ensured. A victory for the fort, a devastating defeat for the Comanche. He should have felt satisfaction, or at least relief, that the soldiers had been spared. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled in his chest. "Your warning saved lives today, Caldwell," Hayes said, joining him at the wall after ensuring the fort's security. American lives. The subtle emphasis on American wasn't lost on Nathan. It was a reminder of where his loyalties were expected. To lie, regardless of his unusual experience with Morning Star. "I know," Nathan replied simply, unable to articulate the complexity of his feelings. Hayes studied him with shrewd eyes. "You've changed since you were last in these parts. This healer who saved you, they've affected your perspective." It wasn't a question, so Nathan didn't treat it as one. He merely returned the captain's gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying the observation. After a moment, Hayes continued. "The army could use your skills again, Caldwell. Your knowledge of Comanche territory and methods would be valuable. As we expand control in this region," the offer was presented casually, but Nathan recognized it for what it was, both an opportunity and a test of his allegiance. Before meeting Morning Star, he might have accepted without hesitation, seeing it as merely another job in a life with few anchors. Now, the proposition carried different weight. Working as an army scout would mean actively participating in the subjugation of Morning Star's people, potentially leading soldiers to Comanche camps, becoming an instrument of the very military machine that was gradually crushing native resistance throughout the Western Territories. "I appreciate the offer, Captain," Nathan said carefully, "but I need time to consider my next steps." Hayes nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. You've been through an ordeal. Rest, recover your strength. The offer remains open." He paused, then added with deliberate neutrality, "Though I would caution you about divided loyalties in these dangerous times. Men caught between worlds often end up trusted by neither." With that subtle warning, Hayes departed to oversee the fort's return to normal operations, leaving Nathan alone with his thoughts and the vista of the battlefield gradually emptying, as details were assigned to recover weapons from the fallen warriors. 3 days passed while Nathan recuperated at Fort Griffin, regaining strength under Dr. Morrison's care. The doctor continued to express professional fascination with the native healing techniques evident in Nathan's recovery, repeatedly requesting details that Nathan provided only in the vaguest terms. Morning Star's knowledge was hers to share, or withhold. He would not become the conduit for its appropriation. During these days, Nathan found himself increasingly restless within the fort's confines. The military routine, once familiar, now felt stifling. Conversations with soldiers inevitably turned to hostiles and savages, terms that now grated on his ears with their dismissive simplicity. These men saw the frontier conflict in black and white, unable or unwilling to recognize the humanity of their adversaries. On the fourth morning, Nathan made his decision. He approached Captain Hayes in his office, finding the commander reviewing reports at his desk. "I've considered your offer, sir," Nathan began without preamble. Hayes looked up, setting aside his papers. "And? I'm grateful, but I must decline. I'll be leaving the fort today." The captain leaned back in his chair, studying Nathan with that same penetrating gaze. "May I ask your destination?" Nathan had prepared for this question, knowing a direct answer would raise concerns. "East, initially. I have business in Dallas that's been neglected too long." It wasn't entirely a lie. He did eventually need to reach Dallas to collect payment for the ill-fated wagon train guidance, funds that would be necessary for his future plans. But his immediate destination lay in a different direction entirely. Hayes seemed to sense the partial truth but didn't press. "The next supply wagon heads east tomorrow. You'd be welcome to join them." "I prefer to travel alone," Nathan replied. "I've imposed on the fort's hospitality long enough." A knowing expression crossed Hayes's face. "You're going back to find the healer, aren't you?" The directness of the question caught Nathan off guard. He hesitated just long enough for Hayes to nod, taking his silence as confirmation. "I thought as much," the captain said. "You should know that after the failed raid, Lieutenant Parker's patrol captured a wounded warrior. Before he died, he mentioned a tribal healer suspected of aiding whites." Hayes watched Nathan's reaction closely. "Apparently there's been some question about this healer's extended absences from the village." Cold dread settled in Nathan's stomach. Did he name this healer? He did. A woman called Morning Star. Hayes's expression remained carefully neutral. "This information hasn't been recorded in any official report yet." The implication was clear. Hayes was offering Nathan something valuable, both a warning and a head start. Whatever the captain's feelings about Comanche in general, he recognized the debt owed to the healer who had saved Nathan's life. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly. Hayes nodded once, then returned to his papers. "Good luck, Caldwell. I hope you find what you're looking for out there." By noon, Nathan had departed Fort Griffin, riding a sturdy bay gelding purchased from the fort's stable master with a promissory note against his Dallas funds. His supplies were minimal but adequate. Ammunition for the army revolver Hayes had provided without official documentation, basic provisions, a canteen, and a blanket roll. He traveled northwest, pushing the horse as hard as he dared. Anxiety growing with each passing hour. If Morningstar's people suspected her of helping whites, her life was in danger. The question was whether he could reach her in time to help, and whether she would accept that help if offered. It took Nathan a day and a half to reach the vicinity of the healing lodge, approaching cautiously as twilight softened the landscape. He concealed his horse in a stand of cottonwoods and continued on foot, every sense alert for signs of danger. The lodge came into view as he crested a small rise, its familiar outlines silhouetted against the darkening sky. No smoke rose from the smoke hole, no movement disturbed the stillness around the structure. Nathan's apprehension deepened as he approached, hand resting on his revolver. The lodge entrance flap hung open, stirring slightly in the evening breeze. Inside, darkness and emptiness greeted him. The fire pit contained only cold ashes, the sleeping furs and supplies gone. Morningstar had abandoned the healing lodge, though whether by choice or force, Nathan couldn't determine. He searched the area methodically, looking for any sign that might indicate what had happened or where she had gone. Near the spring, he found what he was seeking, a small arrangement of stones that would appear random to most observers, but which Nathan recognized as a deliberate pattern. Morning Star had left a message for him, anticipating his return. This stone pattern pointed northwest, toward the distant mountains that marked the traditional Comanche winter grounds. A deliberate message. She had fled, rather than face accusation from her tribe, choosing the path of exile over confrontation. Nathan stood for a long time, considering his options. He could follow her, but the mountains were vast, with countless hidden valleys and caves where a single person might disappear. Finding her would be nearly impossible without help or more specific directions. More importantly, was pursuing her the right choice? Morning Star had saved his life at enormous risk to herself. Now that her actions had been discovered, perhaps, the kindest thing he could do was let her forge her new path without the additional complication of his presence. As Nathan wrestled with these questions, sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples behind the silhouetted mountains. The beauty of the moment caught him, reminding him of something Morning Star had said during his recovery. Great Spirit speaks in beauty. Listen with heart, not just ears. In that moment of stillness, his decision crystallized. He would follow her trail as far as he could, not to impose himself on her new life, but to offer her the same choice she had given him. The opportunity to decide her own path forward, with full knowledge of the possibilities before her. Nathan returned to his horse as night fell fully across the land. Tomorrow, he would begin the journey northwest, into mountains that had claimed the lives of many white men over the years. He had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead or the slim chances of success. But he had survived against impossible odds once before, emerging from the massacre at Serpent Creek when all others perished. Perhaps that survival had a purpose beyond merely continuing to draw breath. Perhaps it was meant to lead him to this precise moment, this precise choice. The stone bear talisman Morning Star had given him rested against his chest, a tangible reminder of the bridge already built between their two worlds. Whether that bridge would support the weight of whatever came next remained to be seen. But Nathan Caldwell, sole survivor of the Wagon Massacre at Serpent Creek, had learned one truth through blood and healing. Life's meaning lay not in past tragedies, but in the choices that followed them. And he had made his choice. In the darkness, he turned his horse toward the mountains, and whatever fate awaited him there, guided by stars that had witnessed countless human journeys, but passed judgment on none. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.